Welcome to the card ratings with Trump. I learned a lot from my Mean Streets of Gadgetzan ratings, and I have spent tens of hours looking at these cards and theorizing them and putting them in decks and thinking about what the new meta will be. These cards are rated based off of how often I think they will be seen in the new standard format. They are being rated purely on that merit, which means that some cards that are technically good may get a 1-star because they're in a bad deck, because there's no deck to support such an archetype. And some cards, which seem kind of innocent and not that useful, may get a very high rating because I think it'll be very important in the meta. 1-star, the card will not see play in the meta. In the future, these cards may become good, but for this next 4-month period, will not see play. 2-star, it'll see sparingly played. All cards will probably be experimented with in the first month of Journey to Ungrow, but the 2-star rating would fall into cards that see a light amount of play, perhaps as a very small flavor card, a counter card which pops up every now and again, a card that is outclassed later on when deck refinement is done. 3-star, this is a card that's probably the worst card in a tier 2 deck, or is a card in a tier 3 deck, a deck that doesn't perform that well, or a weak card in a deck that's alright, but is a card that does see play. 4-star, it's a card that sees quite a lot of play, perhaps not in the top decks, but in a good amount of the strong competitive decks. And then finally 5-star, a card that sees play across many decks, or is a card that sees play in the best deck. I think this is one of the toughest ways to rate cards, but it is the most accurate way to rate cards. In order to come up with these card ratings, I went ahead and actually built decks. I built a lot of decks, chatted with players about this, I chatted with Twitch about it, I researched things. Basically, cards with a high rating ended up actually making it into decks that I thought were good, and cards with a low rating were cards that I ultimately ended up not including in my theory crafted decks. Let's begin! Jungle Giants, 4 stars. This quest doesn't have an insane reward, can be argued to not be that useful, but I think of Jungle Giants as something along the lines of having to keep a 6 cost in your hand, which will eventually be played later on, and I think a 6 mana 8/8, which discounts everything in your deck in the future, is decent enough. Plus, it's the build around, plus you can run Nourish and Lunar Visions. I think it'll work out as a deck archetype, specifically with Beast Druid. Tortorlin Forager, 4 stars. A 2-mana 2/2, which adds a serious card to your hand, which can help complete the quest, is bound to be good. Elder Longneck, 3 stars. I think it has a chance of seeing play in a Beast deck, but more specifically in the Beast deck that does the quest. It's a nice, cheap card to start your quest journey. Verdant Longneck, 1 star. It's pretty weak. It does activate the quest, but it costs too much mana for its stat value. Earthen Scales, 2 stars. Some people argue that this would be a good card in Jade. However, I don't think Jade Druid will be a very strong card, and I don't think it fits into Beast Druid, which worries more about controlling the board and is a mid-range deck. Shellshifter, 4 stars. This card works with the Druid quest, but also, in the case of facing off against aggro, can easily turn into a Sen'jin Shieldmaster, which is a good card against aggro. Evolving Spores, 1 star. It is a card that requires you to already have a board, and then doesn't do that much for the board. Savage Roar is probably better. Living Mana, 1 star. It would probably be best in a aggressive tempo token deck, but I could not build a deck to support Living Mana. With the loss of Living Roots, it was too difficult to do this. Giant Anaconda, 1 star. This card counts as 2 for the Jungle Giants quest. However, due to its 7 mana cost for a 5/3 stat line, it is extremely bad. Tyrantus, 1 star. It seems like it would be really insane to copy this with Menagerie Warden, and it would be, but it's very difficult to fit a 10 cost into a Beast Druid deck, and it's tough to fit Sun Fury Protector or Defender of Argus into a Beast Druid deck. you'd probably want this to be taunted, so it's not that useful. The Marsh Queen, 5 stars. This is a very exciting quest, and the reward is absolutely insane. The reward is so insane that you're willing to seriously warp your deck in order to complete it. The more 1-drops you put into your deck, obviously the more consistent you will be in doing this, and this allows a wide variety of strategies, depending on how early you want to finish the quest. I personally want to finish this quest about turn 6 so I can play Queen Carnassa on turn 7. So I turned to simulations to decide how early that would be. If you're running Igneous Elemental, which gets you 2 1-drop elementals, then you have, with about 14 1-drops in your deck, you'll have about a 66% chance of finishing that. With 27 1-cost minions, you would very often be able to complete this quest on turn 4 and then play Queen Carnassa on turn 5. However, I deemed it good enough to complete it on turn 6 so that you didn't have to build the 27 1-drop minion route, which could be very inconsistent. Even though you get Queen Carnassa very consistently, the upcoming draws after that could be very poor in general. So 66% on turn 6 or earlier, that seems pretty good, and higher chances the more turns obviously you get, or the more 1-drops you include. An interesting deck building stylistic idea. Jeweled Macaw, 5 stars. This card will see play in every single hunter deck. It is a better web spinner, and it helps complete the hunter quest. What an insane card. Grievous Bite, 2 stars. While this card may have initially seemed pretty good to me, as well as to a lot of people, I tried to put it into my mid-range hunter deck, and I tried to put it into my quest hunter deck, and I just couldn't find the room. I think this will ultimately see play maybe a tiny bit, perhaps if a lot of aggro decks come around. Crackling Razor Maw, 5 star. Between mid-range hunter and also quest hunter, both running a good amount of 1-drops or sticky beasts, I think Crackling Razor Maw will have an easy time hitting those beasts, and a 2-mana 3/2 with a very useful ability, which is worth somewhere between 0.5 and 1 mana, I think makes for a strong card. Raptor Hatchling, 5 star. Kind of on the low side of 5 star, however, based on the number of 1-drop cards you need to put in the Hunter Quest deck, this one makes the cut, I would say. It even made the cut in my experimental mid-range Hunter deck because of Tol'vir Warden. Tol'vir Warden can fetch the 4/3 Raptor in your deck, and that gives a lot of value to shuffling this 4/3 Raptor into your deck. I think you'll be able to get it by the time the game ends a good amount of time, and then that's a lot of value. Furthermore, a 1-cost beast is really useful with Stampede. Terrascale Stalker, 3 stars. I think that this card will possibly see play in mid-range hunter. Really want to hit exactly Kindly Grandmother or Infested Wolf or Rat Pack or Savannah Highmane. There's a lot of cards that are sticky, and this card will give a lot of value if it hits one of them. Tol'vir Warden, 5 stars. This card is absolutely insane in both mid-range hunter as well as questing hunter. In quest hunter, you want to play 1-cost minions. This gives you 2 of them. In mid-range hunter, you'll usually have a few 1-cost minions because Jeweled Macaw is really good, and Alley Cat might make the cut. And Raptor Hatchling, I think, makes the cut as well, especially with Tol'vir Warden. The chance of fetching the 1-mana 4/3 beast is very prime. Stampede, 4 stars. I originally had Stampede at 5, however I wasn't quite sure that you could fit this into decks. I figure if you manage to cast Stampede and cast 2 beasts, you're doing pretty well, as 1 mana to draw 2 random beasts is fairly good. But ultimately, with a limited amount of deck spots for the quest hunter, maybe this doesn't end up being a 2-of in that deck. And in mid-range hunter, maybe this is a bit too slow. Dinomancy, 1 star. When I tried to put this card into mid-range hunter as well as quest hunter, I found that it got ousted out because it was a little too slow. It kind of suffers from the same idea as Shadow Form in Priest. Shadow Form is really good in paper. Setting your hero power to deal 2 damage to anything is great. And certainly setting your hero power to give a beast +2/+2 is also very good, probably even better. But the problem is, certainly it gets its value over time. However, it might just take a bit too long. Swamp King Dread, 3 stars. I don't think you'll have enough room in the Quest Hunter deck to run Swamp King Dread. However, in mid-range Hunter deck, I think some people will love to play a 7-mana 9/9, which has a pretty fast effect. On careful analysis of all of the decks, I don't think very many will be running cards with poisonous in them, and I also don't think very many decks will be running adapt cards. So you don't have to worry your Swamp King Dread will usually not get poisoned very efficiently, and will just be a fast 7-mana 9/9. That's value. Open the Waygate, Mage's crazy quest. Cast 6 spells that you didn't start in your deck, and you get the Time Warp, which is a game changer because, wow, taking an extra turn is very powerful. However, will this crazy kooky potential 1-turn kill actually be good? You finish the quest, you get the Time Warp in your hand, you play Arcane Giant, Time Warp, and you have 5 extra mana to do stuff. You take the extra turn, you Alexstrasza their face, you hit them for 16 with 2 Arcane Giants. That seems like how the deck is going to be played. There's even the alternative crazy way of not having to worry about Taunt and having infinite damage, which is you have 2 Sorcerer's Apprentices, 2 Molten Reflections, and Archmage Antonidas in your hand. You finish the Time Warp, and you have all those prerequisites. That's a lot of work, but it seems like it could be a way to go. So ultimately, a lot of the cards are going to come down to the quest in terms of valuation. So how likely do I think this will be a good deck? I thought carefully about how well this deck would match up against other decks. I think it's overall weaker than Freeze Mage. Freeze Mage was never that strong a deck in the meta. I rate this card 2 stars. I think this will be a fringe deck that has high meme potential, but will ultimately not be that competitive and will get rushed down and crushed all the time. The bottleneck is really that you mostly have to draw your entire deck, which is difficult, and Freeze Mage did not have to draw their entire deck as often. You would more worry about that Alexstrasza would be on the bottom. Now you have to worry about Alexstrasza and 2 Arcane Giants being on the bottom, or Archmage Antonidas and 2 Sorcerer's Apprentices and 2 Molten Reflection, which I think is ridiculous. Shimmering Tempest, 1 star. I don't believe this card will make the cut in the Time Warp deck. Time Warp bottleneck is going to be in drawing your entire deck. Casting the random mage spells will also be difficult, but will not be so difficult that you have to include this terrible card into your deck. Arcanologist, 3 stars. This card obviously has a very strong effect. 2 mana, 2/3, draw a specific card from your deck is insane. You'll run this in any deck where you have Ice Block. The only reason why it's only a 3 star is because I look at the Open the Waygate deck. Yes, it'll include Arcanologist, but will any other deck include it? It's such a strong card that I actually bumped it up to 3 from 2, but I don't see Tempo Mage or Elemental Mage playing this card. Flame Geyser, 1 star. I don't think it's going to see play in elemental decks because though it does add you that elemental synergy so you can activate your other elementals, 2 damage for 2 mana is kind of weak sauce. And I believe you'll be able to activate your elemental synergy just fine with the elemental mage deck that I theory crafted up. Mana Bind, 1 star. This card I don't think is going to make the cut for the Time Warp deck, and also will not see play generally as a card. Counterspell will probably be better in general. Molten Reflection, 1 star. I don't think the Molten Reflection way is the way to go for Open the Waygate. Even though this is a discount on Faceless Manipulator, on your own minions, I don't actually think that you'll be able to utilize this well that often. Steam Surger, 4 stars. This is one of the cards which really helps Mage Elemental decks alongside Water Elemental. Very solid value card. You're getting, even though Flame Geyser isn't that great a card, when you're getting it for free, basically, with a 5/4 body, which also comes with an elemental tag, it's pretty good. This is one of the reasons why Mage will actually have an elemental deck and a tempo deck and an actual good card and a good deck to play, I'd say. Primordial Glyph, 2 stars. Now, a lot of people have tried to debate with me that this card is very much like Unstable Portal, which is insane. However, I liken it more like Farsight, where you are getting a card and then reducing it by the exact mana that you have paid for it, sometimes less if you discover a card with less than 2. Furthermore, discovering a spell holds a slight risk that you don't actually discover any good choices. For that reason, I don't think this will actually be that popular in Tempo Mage, although I could be wrong on this one. But I was still rated 2 stars. I thought kind of carefully on it. Meteor, 2 stars. I think this card is comparable with Flame Strike. However, Flame Strike is not going to be a card that might possibly not see that much play. Meteor will see play and open the Waygate, possibly as a one-of alongside Flame Strike, and maybe you see Meteor and even Tempo Mage instead of Flame Strike, but ultimately I don't see it that often, I think. Pyros, 3 stars. I think the card will fit into Elemental Mage decks. It is a handy 2-mana elemental to activate the elemental cards that you want activated on proper turns, and it comes back as a 6-mana 6/6, which can also activate a 7-cost elemental. I think it will see play in Mage elemental decks, but maybe not. Paladin's Quest is the last Kaleidosaur, which has the very challenging condition of casting 6 spells on your minions. This is generally going to be buff cards. There's some ideas being thrown around, such as using Muklia to get bananas, which are 2 spells. You can use the neutral legendary of the Vorax to double up on one, and you can use the Paladin card of Primal Fin Champion to possibly double up. However, on careful analysis, I've tried to build this deck, and it always comes up like a gimmick deck, which is easily removed. It reminds me a lot of Inner Fire Divine Spirit from Priest. It's a cool concept, and the Gul'dan is certainly a very strong reward, but I don't see it working. So therefore, I award it 1 star, and I don't think the deck is going to work. Adaptation, 1 star. I think of Adapt as worth somewhere between 0.5 and 1 mana when bundled into a card. If the card itself is 1 mana, and it actually takes the card is horrifically weak. Even though you can possibly put Poisonous on Pyromancer with this kind of effect, it only happens 30% of the time and is not worth it in my opinion. The other potential type of Paladin deck to come up is Midrange Paladin, and I think Midrange Paladin is the more likely way to go. I rate Lost in the Jungle 3 stars. Lost in the Jungle can be good with Light Fuse Stegodon, which I actually don't hold very much respect for, but also it's just a 1 mana, get 2 1/1s, a nice early game play. And also combos with Sunkeeper Terran. Hydrologist, 3 stars. It's very similar to Dark Peddler in that it's going to discover a 1-cost card. You can get the Runaway Kodo, which can combine with your Tyrion, with your Hydrologist. Those are pretty good. You can get Redemption, which sometimes is really annoying. There's a number of ones that are just handy to have. Also, it's a Murloc, which could mean some really good Curator stuff, alongside the next card, which is a Beast. Still, though, I ultimately didn't think these were that promising to make Midrange Paladin a powerhouse, but a good card. And if Midrange Paladin is played, this will probably see play in it. Light Fuse Stegodon, 1 star. It is with great regret that I rate this 1 star because I thought alongside with Hydrologist, this would be the Beast part of the Curator that you would get. The Hydrologist would be the Murloc part, and then the Dragon part could be that huge neutral dragon, the Primordial Drake. Unfortunately, when I really thought about how good Light Fuse Stegodon was, I started to feel like, oh wait, this is not even close to Quartermaster, adapting your Silverhand recruits, of which you can only actually create with Lost in the Jungle and the hero power. That's not really that many. If you're just pressing the hero power and then playing Light Fuse Stegodon, that's significantly worse than pressing the hero power and playing Quartermaster. It's not really comparable. It is kind of useful to have Silverhand recruits already out and then play Light Fuse Stegodon, give the poisonous effect, and then have him potentially get insane trades, but they're just gonna kill your recruits all the time as usual. So unfortunately, I don't think this will work. Spike Ridge Steed, 3 stars. This is a very powerful buff card. In total, you're getting 412 worth of stat value on 6, which if it were on a minion, that would be very strong. Plus the 412 is both Taunt. This is aggro's worst nightmare if they have no hard removal for it. If you put this on the Vorax, which is the Dream, you're going to get basically 2 times the effect of this, which is a total value of 824 of Taunt. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a deck that would realistically be able to survive to do that. It should still see play in mid-range Paladin as kind of a Sludge Belcher Ultra, and will be part of what makes mid-range Paladin strong if such a deck takes off. Vine Cleaver, 1 star. As much as I value value, I have started to realize the dangers of aggro. Value-wise, the card is great. The main problem is having the time to acquire such value. Whereas True Silver Champion does cost 4, it is actually good because on turn 4 you usually want to be attacking for 4, whereas on turn 7, 4 attack may not be significant enough. Primal Fin Champion, 1 star. Unfortunately, since I don't believe the quest is going to work, this card also similarly ends up just being a gimmick. Most decks are going to be able to deal with this card if you play it on turn 2 as a 1/2, and if you play it on turn 3 with a minor buff on it, it's not even that good, and they can deal with it then. So what are you going to do? Wait until later to put 3 buffs on it and then get your 3 buffs back? By then it'll be too late. Dynasize, 1 star. The card costs too much. Sunkeeper Tarim, 2 stars. This card has a really interesting application in the sense that you can play Lost in the Jungle and then Sunkeeper Tarim, which will give you kind of a Quartermaster effect on your own side, as well as set all of your opponent's minions down to 3/3. However, I'm not entirely sure that it'll even always make the cut for mid-range Paladin decks. Priest, I'm sorry. I really tried to make Awaken the Makers work. Even though the reward is awesome, Amara will set your health to 40. That's pretty impressive. It turns out that summoning 7 Deathrattle minions, even if you only summon 4 and then get N'Zoth, even if you try it in a Kazakus deck, it seems to take too long. You'll die before you actually get the reward, unlike Reno Jackson, which you could play on 6. And against mid-range decks, it seems like Priest isn't that strong. I compared the cards with other decks, and I just found it lacking. All of these Priest cards, and actually the entire Priest class as a whole, will see no play similar to Hunter and Paladin in the previous expansion. I rate Awaken the Makers 1 star. And I believe we are once again in the age of haha Priest. While Binding Heal theoretically has a lot of value attached to it, I rated 1 star for its situational list, and Flash Heal was never good. While Radiant Elemental could be a 2-mana 2/5 on turn 2 with Power Word Shield, I still rated 1 star because the rest of the Priest class isn't good enough to support this card, which is actually not a terrible turn 2 play for Priest for once. Portolan Shellraiser is 1 star because if it's by itself, it's just a 4-mana 2/6, and a Deathrattle deck from Priest seems to be too slow. Other decks can clear all the other cards, and then you're left with a 4-mana 2/6 and you're sad. Crystalline Oracle is probably the best of the Priest cards, however, yet I must rate it 1 star because I don't believe it'll see any play. It's really good with the next card, Mirage Caller, which I have to rate 1 star because even though Mirage Calling Crystalline Oracle can be great value, you're kind of getting a 3-mana 3/4 and you're getting 2 Deathrattles. Overall, what the Priests have to offer with all of their cards, even with the synergy, just isn't enough. Free from Amber is a 1 star card, actually because the card is bad, not because Priest is bad. It turns out that a lot of minions that cost 8 or more have very useful battle cries, and when you summon these minions, you don't get the battle cry, and that's not very useful. Even though Shadow Visions could theoretically be really good when you copy the Unguro pack, or you could actually use it as a toolbox, or with 2 copies of Radiant Elemental, you can Shadow Visions forever. Such applications are very fringe and will not be competitively viable in my opinion, so I must rate it 1 star. Curious Glimmerroot gets 1 star because even though it's a 3-mana 3/3, draw a card, which is really powerful, it is unfortunately not enough to carry the Priests. Lyra the Sunshard, 1 star. Mike Donay, unfortunately you were wrong when you said that unfortunately, we may have made the Priest card too good. I don't know what kind of things you were testing. Perhaps you were doing Lyra the Sunshard and 2 Radiant Elementals and then somehow going infinite off of this, but I find such a proposition to be ludicrous and fringe and unlikely. No on the Lyra. No on Control Priest, no on Quest Priest. Priest, in my opinion, will not see any play in this next expansion. However, that's not to say that these cards are bad. A lot of them have set up potential goodness for Priest in the future. The Caverns Below is a quest that I really tried to make work. I thought about a lot of different ways to do it. You can activate this quest pretty early, and you can do it pretty consistently. Perhaps cards to look into would be Igneous Elemental and Firefly, since those both create flame elementals. Or perhaps ways to look at it would be to use Swashbuckler or Novice Engineer and use bounce effects on them. I happen to use both, and I think I would have been able to get the Crystal Core pretty easily. However, the main weakness of the Caverns Below deck is that so much of the early game requires you to basically set up to get the Crystal Core, and then you play the Crystal Core, which costs 5 mana, and then after that you start to go into good stuff mode. But the problem is if you're doing not much between turns 1 and 4, you're going to die. And also the reward perhaps doesn't even win you the game instantly. Even though I thought I came up with a pretty cool The Caverns Below deck, I have to rate The Caverns Below 1 star. Hallucination, I rate 1 star, just because it's your typical 1 mana discover a card. Those have not really been that successful in the past. Razor Petal Volley, I rate 1 star, and I actually find the card extremely offensive because it's so weak. I kind of understand that perhaps this sets up a rogue theme of this card is 3 spells in 1, and that's kind of interesting. I can respect that. But right now, it seems to have no application whatsoever. Razor Petal Lasher, I rate 1 star. It's kind of offensive for a 2-mana 2/2 to give you a Moonfire which costs 1. Mimic Pod, I rate 2 stars. I think Mimic Pod could see play in Water Rogue, the rogue that runs Murlocs right now, similar to how Arcane Intellect is run in Tempo Mage. However, this is kind of a generous give of 2 stars because I think Arcane Intellect gets the extra synergy from Mana Worm and Sorcerer's Apprentice, so that may be a bit better. Mimic Pod also doesn't give you a variety of answers and just gives you 2 of the same card. Envenom Weapon, I give 1 star, even though the card is theoretically extremely powerful. Combining 2 Assassinates into 1 card for only 3 mana at the cost of just using your basic weapon, I could not find a mid-range or control rogue build, and I think the current rogue build is to play it aggressively. Obsidian Shard, I rate 1 star. Even though Swashbuckler is a common card, and even though a 3-mana 3/3 might be decent, I don't think it's that good, and a 2-mana 3/3 is kind of hard to reach. I think Burgle decks will still not be viable. Biteweed, I rate 1 star because I believe Miracle Rogue will die. I'm not sure Biteweed would have even seen play in those decks, and the reason for Miracle Rogue's demise is because Tomb Pillager was extremely strong, and Concealing a Gadgetzan Auctioneer was very strong, both of which will no longer be possible. Vinespine Slayer, I hesitantly rate 1 star. The card in theory is extremely powerful, however I don't believe there is a mid-range or control rogue build to support it. And the reason for there not being a mid-range or control rogue viable is because they don't really have late game cards is what I'm seeing. Sherazin Corpse Flower, I rate 1 star. It's probably for this card that they printed cards such as Razor Petal Volley, which is 3 spells in 1. Which means you can play the Razor Petal Volley and a Razor Petal and a Razor Petal and Resurrect your Sherazin, but we can see that there may be future design space of possibly Razor Petal Volley being 3 cards in 1, being kind of useful. Unite the Murlocs is a really interesting quest, which I actually think will create a viable deck, and it is this card that will lead to that viable deck. The way to build the deck is obviously to build a lot of Murlocs, and then you summon the Megafin, and then you refresh your hand. I find it possibly not a tier 1 deck, unlike the Hunter, just because Murlocs are more easily dealt with. You can kill them 1 by 1, or you can AoE them down as a bunch. For that reason, I rate Unite the Murlocs a 4-star card, as a card that can possibly lead this into a tier 2 or maybe tier 3 deck. Use up all your cards, you get the Megafin, and then you fill up your hand. It could really easily draw 10 cards. Unite the Murlocs is especially easy to complete due to Call in the Finishers summoning 4 Murlocs, but you're also going to need extra Murlocs on top of that. There's some interesting ideas to run minimal Murlocs with only Call in the Finishers and Finja package, but that's not going to be enough, I think, because you would need to draw both Call in the Finishers. So I actually think you have to build a Murloc deck. Worth trying for sure. Air Elemental. 1 star. Some people say, hey, at least it takes a card to deal with it, and it can't just be coiled or hero powered, but actually it can be daggered or shapeshifted by rogue or druid. In fact, the only class that can deal 1 damage with a hero power that can't deal with this is mage. Also, Patches eats air elemental for dinner. Hot Spring Guardian, I rate 4 stars. This seems like a strong card, and the only reason why it doesn't get the 5-star treatment is because I'm not sure if this card or Tar Creeper is stronger. If aggro decks are all the rage, I expect to see 2 Tar Creeper and 2 Hot Spring Guardians to shut that down. Tidal Surge, I rate 1 star. I feel like this card doesn't do enough, especially when you compare it with a card such as Jade Lightning. Fire Plume Harbinger, I rate 1 star, and I'll actually elaborate on this because I believe that this is a much anticipated card which is rated highly. If you're playing an elemental deck, you actually don't really have that much card draw in it, so your best case scenario is to have this in your opening hand. How many elementals can you hit with it? In a best case scenario, maybe 4. In that case, you're getting a basic 2 mana discount and you're getting a 1/1 with it. So kind of you innervated and you got a 1/1. That seems kind of good. However, and you got an elemental synergy. However, the downside is 4 is kind of like an upper limit case, I would say. What if you top deck this card? What if you play it with only 2 cards discounted, which is a very likely situation? Then the card is trash. I think the card is overall pretty trash. Primal Fin Totem, 4 stars. I think this card will see play in every single Unite the Murlocs deck. Volcano! 2 stars. I didn't personally find a control shaman, but if there's a control shaman, it'll probably run Volcano. Also worth mentioning, Volcano might counter a particularly good card of this set, the Bittertide Hydra. Spirit Echo, 1 star. Feels like a win more card, comparable to Infest, which never saw play. Stone Sentinel, 3 stars. It feels like a natural fit for an elemental deck. However, there might be a better 7-drop elemental, Blazecaller. I think this card might see a 1 of in elemental decks. Maybe a 2 of, maybe a 0 of. Calamos Primal Lord, 5 stars. The cherry on top of what seems to be a powerful deck in the making, Elemental Shaman. Thank goodness that Shaman finally got another archetype that would be good. Alongside Murloc, Shaman, and mid-range Shaman, and aggro Shaman, and control Shaman, and Jade Shaman. Evolve Shaman, Water Shaman, Crusher Shaman, Mech Shaman, Zeus Shaman. Some of them are named like multiple times, but thank goodness that we have another deck for Shaman. Warlocks get a very interesting quest in Lakari's Sacrifice. This looks like it fits really well into the traditional Disco Zoo deck. However, I believe that Disco Zoo may be better off not running Lakari's Sacrifice, and it's a bigger control discard deck that is going to enjoy Lakari's Sacrifice. The reward of Nether Portal is extremely strong, and I believe it warrants the warping of such a deck. Being able to summon 2 free 3/2 imps every turn is very similar in power level, if not stronger than Jiraxxus, because you don't have to spend the 2 mana a turn on it. And you don't have to pay 9 mana for Jiraxxus. All you have to do is the 1 mana quest and then the 5 mana portal. Building a Lakari Sacrifice deck is going to involve putting in Lakari Fellhound and Doomguard, all the usual suspects of Zoo, however, just not running the 1 cost or 2 cost as much, but going bigger with cards such as Abyssal Enforcer and cards that draw cards. Even if those cards aren't that great, such as Igneous Elemental or Firefly, all you have to do is have some fuel in your hand to discard, and I feel like the sacrifice is worth it. I rate Lakari Sacrifice 5 stars for its great potential. Ravenous Pterodax I value at 2 stars, and that's because I value adapting twice at about worth 5 stats, so I'm valuing this card at about a 4 mana 6/7. However, you have to destroy a friendly minion, which on average might be -1/-1, which might be more like a 4 mana 5/6 then. The only reason why this card might be better than that is because you'll put it in exactly Zoo and you'll eat exactly Devilsaur Egg with it. However, I'm not sure it'll make that deck because you can still buff the egg with cards such as Abusive Sergeant, Direwolf Alpha, and Defender of Argus. Lakari Fellhound I rate 4 stars. It seems like a natural fit into the Lakari Sacrifice deck. I don't believe it's going to be strong enough to make the Zoo deck because it's not quite strong enough when it's comparable in its effect to Doomguard. I rate Tar Lurker 1 star. In its best case, which is when it's on defense, it's a 5 mana 4/7 taunt, which is good. However, when it's on offense, it's a 1/7 taunt, and that's pretty weak. I think that if you were trying to build a defensive control Warlock deck, such as perhaps Handlock, there are better options. Corrupting Mist, I rate 2 stars. Even though this looks like the dream, the Doomsayer that always goes off successfully, one of the reasons why Doomsayer is powerful is that it prevents opponents from playing minions on that turn. Actually, a very large reason why Doomsayer is good. With Corrupting Mist, you guarantee that their board dies, but you have to take some damage. And also, I don't see any archetypes that make this work well in their deck yet. But I may be very well surprised. A control Warlock which doesn't put cards on the board would be the goal to put this card in, but I don't see such a deck working yet. Feeding Time, I value as 1 star. It is the fixed implosion, but it turns out that the average value of implosion when you raise the card by 1 mana makes the card significantly unplayable. Because many cards are turned from great to unplayable with the raise of 1 mana. And yes, they summon pterodaxes, not demons, but that doesn't really factor in that much. Cruel Dynamancer, I rate 1 star. It's a big fall from grace because initially I did put this into my Lakari Sacrifice deck. However, I started realizing that there was the very real chance that this card would end up just summoning various garbage cards that were discarded. You can't control your discards, and furthermore, it's a Deathrattle. Perhaps you just settle for Cairn instead if you were to go for such a value card. Blood Bloom, I rate 1 star. This is a very fascinating effect. However, it turns out that most of the Warlock cards you can cast, the spells, aren't that useful. It's way too situational to try to lower the cost on some certain top cards such as Doom or Twisting Nether or Siphon Soul. Chittering Tunneler I rate as 2 stars. The damage dealt to the hero is kind of painful, but when you compare it with Life Tap, you're basically getting a 1 mana 3/3 and you're discovering a card which you can just choose the bad card. Maybe you discover Sacrificial Pact and you don't even lose any health. That's kind of nice. Maybe you discover a 1 cost or a 2 cost, and that's the same as tap. Why is that important? That's because you can just throw away the card to cards you discard towards the Lakari Sacrifice. This may be a card that's significantly better than 2 stars, depending on how the Sacrificial deck ends up working. I'm tempted to even call it 3 stars, but I'll call it 2 stars. And welcome to Disco Lock and Lakari Sacrifice decks. Pretty much best card, the Clutch Mother Zavis, which I rate 5 stars. Naturally, it's a card that'll always stay in your hand to discard, so you'll always have this card. It's absolutely amazing. Keep it in your opening hand pretty much always, and possibly because of this card, if you're lucky, Zoo might also be able to work with Lakari Sacrifice. The Warrior Quest, and some top players are calling this Taunt Warrior deck Tier 1, by the way, I will say before I go into this. Now, the main problem with this is you have to play 7 Taunt minions, and the other problem is you have to play Warrior, and for that reason, I rate this card 1 star. That may be shocking, but I tried to build these Taunt Warrior decks, and they just looked like they were going to get crushed by mid-range decks, as well as control decks. And I tried to build a Control Warrior deck with a light amount of Taunt Warrior, but Control Warrior didn't look like it was doing too well against mid-range decks and Jade decks too. So, in short, I don't expect this archetype to work. Furthermore, deal 8 damage to a random enemy may not even be that good when you're up against a lot of Zoo decks, a lot of aggro decks, a lot of Murloc decks, a lot of Hunter decks which spam 3/2s. Ironhide, 1 star. Turns out that shield block without the card draw is not worth 1 mana. Ornery Direhorn, 1 star. I value Adapt at worth about 0.5 mana, even for something like this. And yes, this counts for the quest, but this is a 5/5 taunt, which would probably be worth about 4.5 mana. And then you roll in the Battlecry Adapt with it, so I'd say this card should be fair at 5 mana. But unfortunately, it costs 6. Tarlord, 1 star. Even though this might be a good Control Warrior card, I don't see enough tools for Control Warrior to make this work. Sorry, Tarlord. Molten Blade, 1 star. I was thinking about whether or not this card might see a little bit of play in Pirate Warrior, which is the warrior deck archetype that will still survive. And no, it won't, because you just want to run your good Fire War Axe and your Arcanite Reaper. Cornered Sentry, 1 star. Even if Taunt Warrior ended up being a thing, Dirty Rat ends up being better than Cornered Sentry, because you usually want to combo this with Brawl perhaps. There have been some theories about running this in Whirlwind and Frothing Berserker and taking a more aggressive approach, but I think then you won't be able to play enough taunts to finish out the Fire Plume's Heart Quest that quickly. A lot of deck theory crafting went into making sure that I'm pretty sure that Control Warrior and Taunt Warrior won't be a thing. Direhorn Hatchling, 1 star. The cool idea behind Direhorn Hatchling, as well as Primordial Drake, which has Taunt, is that you would run this card and Primordial Drake, and you would run Curator, and then you'd have so much value off of the Curator, since you could even fetch the 6/9 Direhorn. However, I think that deck is bad. So Direhorn Hatchling, unfortunately, you're not going to grow up to be that strong Direhorn someday. And Explore Ungoro, 1 star. Turns out replacing your deck with a card which says 1 mana discover a card isn't good enough, even if you have Gadgetzan Auctioneer in your hand. Sun Genesis, 1 star. It's very difficult to actually make this work. King Mosh, 1 star. Why? Well, you want to combo it with Whirlwind in particular. 10 mana, clear the board. That seems pretty good in theory. But Control Warrior, with the loss of Justicar Trueheart, just doesn't have the staying power it used to, I'd say. I don't believe that a Taunt Warrior or a Control Warrior deck will work. Prove me wrong. Glacial Shard, 3 stars. I originally rated this card a 1-star card. However, because of the Elemental tag, and because of possibly seeing play in Pirate Warrior, and also because it costs 1 mana for the Hunter Quest, there's all these possibilities for the Glacial Shard. I happen to think none of those would work, but I've been convinced that perhaps some of them will pan out. Since the Quest Hunter deck takes a while to get going, I could see a card like this keeping you alive and getting you 1 credit towards the quest as possibly warranting a spot in the Hunter Quest deck, especially if you're going for a lot of 1-drops in your Hunter Quest. Firefly, 5 stars. Even though ultimately in most of my elemental decks I ended up not including Firefly, I found that the card wasn't impactful enough, even though it clearly would help activate elementals. I actually ended up including this card in Discard Warlock because it's a card you can play and still hold a card, and I also included the card in Quest Hunter since it counts as 2 1-drops. This is probably one of the best cards in order to finish the Hunter Quest. Maybe it'll see play in elemental decks, but maybe it'll be too insignificant to see play in elemental decks too. Emerald Reaver, 1 star. It is a 1-mana beast, but boy is that a bad 1-mana beast. Rockpool Hunter, 3 stars. I believe it will absolutely see play in the Murloc Shaman deck, which we will have to see whether or not it ends up being a good deck. Stubborn Gastropod, 1 star. The card just doesn't have enough impact. Ravasaur Runt, 5 stars. I think this card will see inclusion in quite a few decks, including but not limited to token decks, decks that get a bunch of cards out early, such as even Pirate Warrior, which can get the Zos First Mate and patches out and possibly even another card if you're going second. Zoo, perhaps. It's just very efficient for the cost. Volatile Elemental, 1 star. Stats be weak. Primal Fin Lookout, 3 stars. Alongside Rockpool Hunter, it should see inclusion in Murloc decks, of which I think it's exactly Shaman Murloc. Tar Creeper, 5 stars. I see Tar Creeper being included across a lot of decks. Well, the most obvious of which are Shaman Elemental and Mage Elemental, but also potentially a general tech include if aggro overruns the place. Thunder Lizard, 1 star. While this is a pretty good effect to go off, I felt like I could not fit this card into the elemental decks. There were just more good stuff to put in there. Admittedly, the card is fairly efficient though. Eggnapper, 1 star. Total stat value just isn't enough for what it costs. Giant Wasp, 3 stars. I put this into my Beast Druid deck. It might be a stand-in for Mulch in general, and 3 mana to remove anything or require an answer seems solid. The 2 health makes it quite a lot better than Patient Assassin because a lot of stuff deals 1 damage to everything, but not that much stuff deals 2 damage. And when you're looking at 2 damage to all, you're actually usually expending a real spell for that. This innocent looking thing could be making it into some decks, and I think Beast Druid deck has a serious consideration for this one. Maybe even Beast Hunter. Possibly an inclusion in the Stealth Rogue package. Possibly. Pterodax Hatchling, 1 star. That is a very inefficient mana to stat ratio card. Igneous Elemental, 5 stars. I see this card as an include in most elemental decks in order to activate their Tol'vir Stone Shaper card on 4. And past that, it also gives you the handy flexibility to activate 2 more elementals in the future. Also, I think this card is good in discard Warlock because you get 2 cards into your hand, which can be discarded for the cheap because they're not very good cards. Fireplume Phoenix, 2 stars. I think it's one of the weaker elemental cards, but it's one of the few cards for Shaman. Mage has 2 elemental cards that are natural for them, Water Elemental, as well as Steam Surger, but Shaman doesn't have any. So if you're looking to activate your Servant of Kalamos on 5, you'll need something on 4, and that could be the Fireplume Phoenix. The stats are fairly fair, just a question of whether or not there's too many cards in that deck and whether or not this card will fit. Stegodon, 1 star. Poor stat to mana ratio. Nesting Rock, 1 star. While this has a reasonable stat to mana ratio, especially if you get Taunt, I see very few decks that can secure 2 other minions and land this card. You can argue that it's not bad when you land it without Taunt, especially in maybe Beast Druid or Beast Hunter, but other cards are more powerful. Sabertooth Stalker, 1 star. You're going to feel very bad when you spend 6 mana for a card and it gets answered much cheaper. That means you lose a lot of tempo. Stormwatcher, 1 star. Extremely poor stat to mana ratio. Sated Threshodon, 1 star. Poor stat to mana ratio on a card that costs a lot of mana, and no, it probably will not see play in Murloc Shaman because it costs too much. Giant Mastodon, 1 star. Poor stat to mana ratio. It's Ancient of War, which is neutral, which costs 2 more. I doubt any deck will run it. Not even the Beast Druid decks, which try to complete the quest, and that would make this cost 0 mana. That would be pretty sweet, but no, that if you draw the card, it's like, ah. Ultrasaur, 1 star. It's actually not bad stat for mana ratio, but the card costs 10 mana and doesn't do anything immediately. It's pretty hard to cast 10 mana cards. Galaka Crawler, 4 stars. Wow. Why is this card 4 stars? Well, it's a 2 mana 2/3 beast that could actually see play naturally in some beast decks, but more than that, I kind of looked ahead on what I thought the meta was going to be, and I thought Pirate Warrior was going to be a very major deck. If there ends up being a lot of Pirate Warrior, you're going to see Galactic Crawler in competitive play to answer those Pirate Warriors. And not just Pirate Warrior, there's also a number of decks that could run patches. And the card Galactic Crawler will really keep a lid on the Pirate Warrior, which looks to be the most threatening aggressive deck right now. Humongous Razorleaf. Welcome to the surprise rating of the set. 5 stars. Why am I rating this card 5 stars? Well, I believe this card single-handedly brings an archetype back into contention. Or maybe not single-handedly, but is a serious impact on handlock. Well, look at the stat value. That's 12 stats for 3 mana. Obviously, you need to combine it with something. I'm not even suggesting combining it with Silence, because Silence typically costs too much. Yes, you might think, ooh, Priest, Purify, ooh, use the 5 mana 5/5 Silence. But no, I'm talking more practical. You play Ancient Watcher, you go back to your roots with Ancient Watcher, Humongous Razorleaf, you do the Sunfury Protector, you do the Defender of Argus. It's good. Furthermore, you have Faceless Shambler. I think Handlock will be a tier 1 deck, and that's majorly because of Humongous Razor Leaf. Vicious Fledgling, one of the few cards that can actually gain multiple adaptations over time. It's still just a 3 mana 3/3 to turn it plays. 1 star. Devilsaur Egg, 4 stars. I believe it will see play in exactly Zoo and exactly the type of Zoo which will not run the quest. Looks very strong, looks just like Nerubian Egg. Great card. You activate it with Direwolf Alpha, with Defender of Argus, and with Abusive Sergeant. Maybe this card sees play in Handlock also, because you can Sun Fury and Argus it. And it has a chance of seeing play in other decks, such as if I missed the mark on Buff Paladin, it would certainly see play there. Could see play in token decks as well, such as Token Druid, if that ends up being a deck. Stonehill Defender, 1 star. This is probably only really a consideration if you're playing Taunt Warrior. And even then, I think this card was too slow tempo to run. A good value over time deck though. Tovir Stone Shaper, 5 stars. One of the cards that makes elemental decks so powerful. A 4 mana 3/5 Taunt Divine Shield is really strong. Zen'jin Shieldmaster was a good anti-aggro card. Now we turn it into both a value card and an even better anti-aggro card. Servant of Kalamos, 5 stars. We thought Azure Drake was good. Servant of Kalamos has 1 more health. And if you're Shaman, you get to discover the Shaman cards a bit higher at a rate. And you're getting some pretty good ones there. You're getting the legendary Shaman card, which is an elemental. You're getting Fire Elemental, you're getting Earth Elemental, and you're getting Unbound Elemental, the little brother who nobody likes. Frozen Crusher, 1 star. I thought about putting this in Handlock, but then I decided that the sacrifice wasn't worth it. On a baseline where a 6 mana card is probably worth about 7 worth of stats, adding that extra 1/1 with the severe weakness isn't that good. Volcanosaur, 1 star. If you're optimistic, you can think of this as neutral Ancient of War. It's a 5/9 with Taunt, but that requires exactly those adaptations. Overall, it's not going to turn out as good as you want it to be. And there's not really that many results that are that good for Volcanosaur. It's just a big minion. Emerald Hive Queen, 2 stars. I think this is excellent design. They finally made a 1 mana 2/3, which is not universally playable. Where might this card be played? It might be a card that sees play in Jade Druid, probably about the only deck I can think of that doesn't run minions. Gluttonous Ooze, 3 stars. If Galactic Crawler wasn't enough, you can still hate on pirates even more with the Gluttonous Ooze. This is a little bit less in ranking than Galactic Crawler because even though it's just as, if not more devastating than Pirate Warrior, it's actually surprising that I think you can hit pirates more often than you can hit weapons, which are important. Bright-Eyed Scout, 2 stars. I see some limited application for this card. Either you're playing it in a deck which has average mana cost of 4 or higher, because it is a better Gnomish Inventor in that respect, or you put it in a deck with Hemet Jungle Hunter. You play the Jungle Hunter, and then when you draw the card, on average you're saving mana with it. You possibly put it into the Warlock discard. You're drawing the card, and sometimes you're getting a discount, and great, you'll play it. Sometimes you're getting a card which is overcosted, and okay, that's discard fodder. And also, card draw is kind of rare, so we're not beggars here. I think there's enough possibilities that this card will see play in some kind of deck. Gentle Megasaur, 4 stars. This card has 2 possible applications. One is in the Shaman Murloc deck, and it's 4 mana 5/4, so not terrible stats, and you adapt your Murlocs alongside it, which could be a really big boon. Where I think it probably has more application is in any deck which is running both the water package, the Finja, the 2 Murloc War Leaders, and the 2 Bluegill Warriors, and then the Curator fetches this card and the Murloc, since this is the beast, and presumably the only beast you're going to be running with your Murlocs. So it has a wide variety of applications. Bittertide Hydra, 5 stars. What a beast. I mean, I just look at the stats, 5 mana 8/8, and a beast. So what makes this card so good, whereas Fel Reaver wasn't? This is a sort of new standard, so there's fewer cards out there, and 5 mana 8/8 just seems strong. It also has the beast tag on it, which could be very useful. You can put a handmaster on it, and before you laugh that you want this card to have taunt, I mean your opponent would probably be able to do more damage if this didn't have taunt. You can copy it with Menagerie Warden, that's a beast. It even counts as a quest activation for the Druid quest. This card could fit into quite a few decks, such as Pirate Warrior, to hit you in the face harder. In aggro rogue, it could be curatored as well. Lots of applications, heavy stats, hard countered by Volcano, but that probably doesn't matter much. Blazecaller, 5 stars. It's the neutral elemental lovers which are really pushing this elemental deck to be so strong. Fire elemental in the Blazecaller, that's a natural progression, and it sure seems very powerful. Portolan Primalist, 1 star. Paying 8 mana for a Hail Mary. Well, you could pay 10 mana for Yogg-Saron, but at least you were getting so many more targets, so many more spells. This one, just run Flamestrike instead, right? Primordial Drake, 2 stars. I was a little bit surprised by this rating because there aren't that many good dragons left, and there's a good amount of beasts in this set, and there's some Murlocs in unusual places. So the curator can fetch a Murloc, a beast, and a dragon. My first instinct with Paladin was to run Paladin Beast and the Paladin Murloc and this dragon. And also in Taunt Warrior. It seems like there's enough applications, but why is it only 2 stars? Because I don't think either deck is really going to work, and I don't think, well, not that I think mid-range Paladin isn't going to work necessarily, but I don't think this Drake makes it there with the curator because the Beast and the Murloc are still kind of questionable. Not the Murloc. The Murloc's pretty good. The Beast, though. I'm not sure what Beast you fetch. There's quite a few applications for this one, but ultimately I fear it may not come to fruition. And it's probably going to be a one of, if it does see play. Charged Devilsaur, 1 star. King Crush wasn't good. This card probably wouldn't be good even if it could attack heroes the turn it came out. The Vorax, 1 star. 1 star because I don't think the buff Paladin deck will work. And also, I think it's far too optimistic to hope for a turn 10 the Vorax plus a Spike Ridge Steed. Although I will say that that 2-card combo is one of the strongest 2-card combos I can think of. Has some applications in Priest because if you put Power Word Shield on it, you're drawing 2 cards. You're getting a 3/5 and a 1/3. However, Priest. Spirit Singer Umbra in perhaps the surprise card of review starage. I'm rating this a 1 star because I think Priest is absolute garbage, and I don't think very many other decks can take advantage of this. 4 health is a bit vulnerable, so you're usually wanting to play this card and a Deathrattle minion immediately, of which many of the other classes don't have a good one. At least the Trailblazer, 4 stars. I personally put this into my Elemental Mage deck, and I put it into my Handlock deck. Possibly see play also in the Mage Quest deck. And it could see play anywhere. It's a 5 mana 5/5 in a world which has lost Azure Drake, and opening an Ungoro pack is pretty good. But it will probably need to be put into a control deck, since you'll need to actually have enough time to draw the Ungoro pack. Could easily be a 5-star card. However, I'm just not really sure that any of the decks that I put it in will ultimately keep her around. Could therefore be a 1-star card if you don't ever see her around, but I've securely put her in at least 2 decks, and I think that they are reasonable choices, so we'll see how that works out. Hemet Jungle Hunter, 3 stars. I pitched the card as really interesting, and I think that the card ultimately does not have any combo applications right now, but in mid-range or control decks, you will play this and it will give you better draws in the future. Decks that I've put this in are Control Warlock deck that attempts to do the quest. Also traditional mid-range decks that may not need these cards later. Mid-range Paladin or Zoolock. There's so many types of decks that it could be put in, and I actually managed to find at least one deck that seemed reasonable in it, which is the Control Warlock deck, that I'm willing to give it a 3, and I think it'll see play somewhere else. Some people are very antsy at the idea of destroying half their deck, but destroying half your deck is extremely good if you are entering turn 7. And finally, we end the card rating on Osric, which is a 1-star card. By the time you play the 9-mana card, you might already have been overrun by aggro, though admittedly if you haven't, this will be a tough wall for them to overcome. If you're up against mid-range decks, you could get hexed very commonly, you could get sapped, you could get executed, you could get a lot of different hard removal, which will really destroy any sense of mana efficiency with this card. Huge statted minions for big mana, though the taunt helps a lot, are generally not that useful due to hard removal. That's the turbo rating of all the cards. I understand I may have upset some of you by rating your favorite legendaries 1 star, but I think these card ratings were tough to do, and I had to make some tough calls, and I had to do a lot of research and dig deep, but I ultimately believe that the cards I rated 1 star will not see any play, and therefore I rated them exactly where they should be. Through tinkering through decks and ultimately through the playing of these decks, there will be less of these, but I found 17 main archetypes of decks. Elemental Shaman, Pirate Warrior, Quest Hunter, Handlock, Zoo, which is a discard lock without quest, Quest Warlock, which is a kind of control Warlock deck, which will try to complete the Warlock quest, Jade Shaman, Midrange Hunter, Murloc Shaman with the quest, Tempo Elemental Mage, Aggro Rogue, which has the Water Finja package, Beast Druid with the quest, Hand Buff Paladin, note not Buff Paladin, but the Mean Streets of Gadgetzan buffs, Jade Druid, the Mage quest, which seeks to take an extra turn, Midrange Paladin, and Aggro Shaman. I think those are 17 of the most likely decks to show up in the new meta.